Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today to discuss the VA Inspector General's final report entitled Inappropriate Use of Position and the Misuse of the Relocation Program and Incentives. The findings of this report unfortunately shed an unflattering light on a culture at VA that is still broken, and one where top senior VBA managers allegedly put their own personal and financial benefit ahead of that of veterans, of taxpayers, and of their subordinates. On October 1st, I sent an invitation to Secretary McDonald which explicitly requested the presence today of then Undersecretary for Benefits Allison Hickey, Ms. Diana Rubens, the Director of the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Regional Office, Ms. Kimberly Graves, Director of the St. Paul, Minnesota Regional Office, Mr. Antoine Waller, Director of the Baltimore, Maryland Regional Office, and Mr. Robert McKenrick, Director of the Los Angeles, California Regional Office. All of these 5 individuals are at the center of the IG's report, and it only seemed reasonable that they appear before our committee today. We've been told by VA that they will not be allowed to appear. Therefore, before we begin the hearing this morning and receive testimony from the IG, we need to pause to vote on a motion to issue subpoenas to employees of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs to compel them to appear and provide testimony to the House Committee on Veterans Affairs on the IG's final report. Today represents just the 4th time in this committee's history that a subpoena has been called for, and the first time that we will vote on a subpoena compelling individuals to appear and provide testimony. And I assure you that I have not come to this decision lightly. And as I mentioned earlier, I sent the Secretary an invitation on October 1st requesting that then Undersecretary Hickey be here today at the witness table and be prepared to respond to questions accompanied by the 4 other individuals. The long story short, on the 15th of October, after several failed requests for a confirmation from VA on the witnesses for today, we received a letter from Deputy Secretary Sloan Gibson stating that the witnesses that we had requested would not be made available for this hearing, and instead he would testify on the department's behalf. So I responded back in my own letter to the deputy, respectfully declining his request to testify on behalf at this committee hearing. First, the authority we provided the Secretary in the Choice Act to more easily remove senior executives was actually delegated to the Deputy Secretary in a memo dated August 28th of 2014. Therefore, since he is the one with the final authority to take adverse actions against these same individuals named in the report, I thought it was wholly inappropriate and out of the question for him to be the lead witness. The department has raised concerns about holding this hearing in the first place, saying that it could possibly jeopardize any personnel actions that could be taken as a result of this report. So why was VA going to send the exact official who has the authority to remove Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves to testify at today's hearing? If I had allowed him to testify, I'm sure that in any appeal to the MSPB, the argument could be made that he was being influenced by members of Congress. Second, I did not ask for him to testify, but laid out quite clearly who we needed to testify at this hearing, as they were the individuals pertinent to the report. I don't believe it sets a good precedent if we allow the department to substitute their judgment for the committees as to who shall testify and to determine the subject on which the department will testify. The witnesses who were requested for a reason, as they were central figures of the IG report, a report that is issued to the public unredacted. They were asked to be here today to go over the facts of the report, not to determine their innocence or their guilt. It's as simple as that. Secretary Gibson's letter also requested that we postpone the hearing to await any possible actions that could be taken by the Department of Justice and the VA. I want to make it clear, this is not a partisan witch hunt, and I am not trying to impair any potential criminal prosecution or administrative actions, which is the exact reason that I did not request the Department of Justice or Deputy Secretary Gibson to testify at today's hearing. There is ample evidence that VA does not move quickly when it comes to accountability. We have seen time and time again that if we do not aggressively shed light on issues that we have uncovered, that the IG uncovers or whistleblowers uncover, then VA will just sweep them under the rug for an extended period of time and wait for public attention to be refocused elsewhere. For example, even after all of the attention we put on the Phoenix VA Medical Center last summer following the IG report of one of the biggest scandals in VA history, 2 of the senior managers who were central figures there have been on paid administrative leave since the spring of 2014. The same could be said for the fiasco at the Denver construction project and that gross misuse of taxpayer dollars where VA still has not taken any steps to provide true accountability and is still investigating the situation. Even when VA does take some sort of final accountability action, they often end up quietly settling with the employee, often paying out tens of thousands of dollars to them and removing any sort of adverse actions from their files. For instance, Mr. DeSantis, the former director of the Toma VA Medical Center, was initially listed as terminated following evidence that came to light over the prescription of opioids and other drugs to veterans at his facility. Although the department first said he was removed under the Choice Act authority, VA subsequently entered into a settlement agreement with him that allowed him to resign in lieu of removal, in addition to other conditions which both parties agreed to, which I will not reveal in this hearing. I can provide you with several other examples if you want, but I think you get the point. Unfortunately, the example of Mr. DeSantis is just one instance in a long list of the kind of accountability, or more accurately, a lack thereof, that VA exercises when left to their own devices. If an IG report comes out like the one we're here to examine today and we do nothing about it and just agree to the department's request for more time, then we would be aiding VA in its business-as-usual routine of quietly rewarding employees accused of serious misconduct with golden parachute settlement packages. It's also disheartening to me to see where the department often places its priorities. If VA put half of the effort into pushing for true accountability or protecting their rank-and-file employees who come forth as whistleblowers, as they have for the individuals investigated in this IG report, then I honestly think the department would be in a much better place. But unfortunately, that's not the reality that we have before us today. It's our duty to step in when the department is unwilling to and ask the important questions. And that means not waiting for a year or 2 or even 3 until all of the processes VA is so worried about are complete. We cannot sit and wait while VA allows this to blow over. That's why we've called this hearing today, and that's why I called for a business meeting to issue a subpoena to compel them to come before us. Since the individuals I requested for today's hearing did in fact not show up, we're going to vote to issue a subpoena that will require Mr. Danny Pummill, Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Benefits, Ms. Diana Rubens, Director of the Philadelphia RO, Ms. Kimberly Graves, Director of the St. Paul, Minnesota RO, Mr. Antoine Waller, Director of the Baltimore Regional Office, and Mr. Robert McKenrick, Director of the Los Angeles, California Regional Office, to appear before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and provide testimony regarding the VA Office of Inspector General's report. Those listed before us will be required to come before this committee on November the 2nd at 7:30 p.m. to testify and answer questions from this committee. Additionally, since General Hickey resigned effective 48 hours prior to today's hearing, which I find it suspect in and of itself, I'm going to be re-inviting her to appear and answer questions in her role as a private citizen. VA's Office of Accountability Review has assured us that they are doing everything in their power to meet their October 31st deadline to review the evidence from the IG and make a recommendation to the Secretary in regards to personnel actions. Therefore, I think the November 2nd date is appropriate, as VA should have finished their own internal review by that time. I now yield to the ranking member for any statement that she may wish to make.
I don't have any statements at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Any other members wish to speak on this issue? Pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2M, 1B of the House of Representatives and Rule 3, Clause G of this committee, I will now hear a motion from Congressman Waltz for the issuance of this subpoena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee authorize the issuance of 5 subpoenas ad testa facundum, compelling Mr. Danny Pummill, Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Benefits, Veterans Benefits Administration, Ms. Diana Rubens, Director, Philadelphia and Wilmington Regional Offices, Veterans Benefits Administration, Ms. Kimberly Graves, Director, St. Paul Regional Office, Veterans Benefits Administration, Mr. Antoine Waller, Director, Baltimore Regional Office, Veterans Benefits Administration, and Mr. Robert McKenrick, Director, Los Angeles Regional Office, Veterans Benefits Administrations, to appear and testify at a public hearing on November 2nd, 2015, regarding the VA Office of Inspector General's final report entitled Inappropriate Use of Position and the Misuse of the Reallocation Program and Incentives.
Mr. Chairman, I second the motion.
Mr. Lamborn has seconded the motion. All those in favor of the motion to issue a subpoena to the 5 VA employees to compel their testimony before this committee on November 2nd at 7:30 p.m. will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the motion carries, and I'm now going to sign the subpoena and hereby direct that it be issued forthwith. This concludes this business meeting of this morning's hearings. I thank all the members that did take time to be able to be here. I know we have a multitude of other committee hearings that are going on, and again, I appreciate your attendance for that. As we move back into our full committee hearing, I first want to recognize a guest in the audience. We have the National Commander, Dale Barnett, from Georgia with us today. Commander, thank you for your attendance and thank you for your service. We thank you all for what the American Legion does, and Commander, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here with us today. I think it's important for members to have an opportunity to listen to the IG and what they found in their report, as well as the recommendations that they have made to the Secretary. This report lays out pretty clearly the intent of 2 senior executives, Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves, to move to Philadelphia and St. Paul respectively, and that they appear to have used their own positions of authority and their own relationships with the former Undersecretary to their advantage. Also, according to the report, 2 subordinates, Mr. Waller and Mr. McKenrick, were then forced to move to positions they did not desire, leaving their positions open for their superiors. The report concluded that not only did Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves use their positions to inappropriately make these RO director positions available, they also manipulated the relocation system to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to move to their respective locations. I want to make it clear that based on our reading of VA's policy prior to this IG report, that the relocation program was available for all SES employees within the department, which, by the way, I believe is an abuse of taxpayer dollars. Regardless, I understand that since Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves are both SES employees, they are both eligible to receive this program under that policy. The report, however, makes it very clear that the IG believes they orchestrated the whole transfer for their own personal and financial gain. Last April, we first discussed VA's relocation program, specifically Ms. Rubens' move, a move in which she received more than $288,000 in relocation expenses, and we requested the IG to look into allegations concerning financial benefits and preferences that may have been given. Until the IG report came out in September, the department strongly supported Ms. Rubens' move and her role in her official capacity in Philadelphia. It was not until the report came out that VA decided to backpedal on this and concur with all of the IG's recommendations. As I said before, this report is damning and it deserves to be examined by this committee. We cannot request the IG to do an investigation, a thorough one at that, and then once they're done, refuse to do anything about it while we await actions on the department's behalf. That's why we're here this morning. This is our role as an oversight committee. We're not here to hold VA's hand and bend to their every request. That has happened far too often in the past under both parties and has contributed to the current situation that we're in. We're here to look at the facts before us and to fairly ask the right questions to ensure transparency between this committee, the department, and the American public. Although our other witnesses are not here today, we will hear from the VA Office of Inspector General, and I hope all members will take this opportunity to learn more about what is in the final report and the recommendations that have been made to the Secretary. Ms. Brown, do you have any comments before Ms. Halliday begins?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. This morning, we will be considering a report issued by the VA Inspector General on September the 28th, 2015, regarding the inappropriate use of the position and misuse of reallocation programs and incentives. I am very concerned about the allegations contained in this report. I also believe that VA employees deserve to have a process that is fair and enable them to process necessarily to reach a fair conclusion. I have urged the Secretary to take suitable action after the VA has considered all of the evidence. The VA is still in the process of making a determination. I understand the sensitivity nature of this decision, and I want to stress again that I am not urging a certain action, but rather that a suitable action be taken at the appropriate time. I know that all members of this committee realize the sensitivity nature of this morning's hearing and the balance we are trying to take between the committee's important oversight duties and the VA ongoing investigation of these matters. I look forward to the discussion of the VA IG's report on this matter. We know that the vast majority of all Veteran Benefits Administration employees, many of them veterans themselves, work hard every day to provide veterans with the benefits they have earned. This is why the allegations and conclusions of this IG report is so troubling. We need to work together to ensure all veterans, employees, from senior leaders to frontline employees, know that they will be rewarded for working hard and that any abuse of a position or authority will simply not be tolerated. So let us discuss the VA IG reports. We are also waiting the VA determination regarding the issue raised in this report and the results of the VA review of incentive and relocation processes. This is the area where the committee has a direct oversight interest in to make sure that relocation incentives is used properly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Thank you again, members, for being here with us this morning. Is Ms. Linda Halliday, Deputy Inspector General. If you would, Ms. Halliday, please come up. With the VA Office of Inspector General, we have heard her testimony on other issues in the past. We appreciate you being here today. And you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the results of the OIG's recently published report on the use of the relocation program and incentives within VBA. The report detailed results of our administrative investigation of allegations that VBA senior executives inappropriately used their position for personal and financial benefit, and that VBA misused the VA relocation program for the benefit of its senior executive service workforce. Our statement and comments will be limited in order to preclude any allegation that our testimony unduly influenced VA or the Department of Justice regarding potential administrative or criminal action. I am accompanied by Mr. Nick Dahl, the Director of the OIG's Bedford Office of Audits and Evaluations, and Ms. Linda Fournier, Director of the OIG's Administrative Investigation Office. In March, this committee and the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee requested we review allegations concerning the relocation of a VBA headquarters senior executive to the position of the Philadelphia Vero Director. The allegation included questions about the relocation package and the retention of salary, even though the Vero Director position had decreased responsibilities. We were also asked to conduct a broader review of VA's Permanent Change of Station, or PCS, relocation expense program. I'd first like to share some background information. The federal travel regulation states that an employee transferring in the interest of government from one agency or duty station to another for permanent duty that is located at least 50 miles from their duty station is eligible for relocation expense allowance. Examples of the relocation expenses include transportation, shipment and storage of household goods, real estate expenses. Employees can also be eligible for temporary quarters subsistence expense, which would include temporary lodging, meals and tips, dry cleaning expenses. Federal agencies can offer employees assistance through the Appraised Value Offer Program, known as AVO, which is designed to help employees sell their primary residence. The program operates as follows. While the employee's property is for sale, two separate appraisals are conducted to estimate the value of the home. The average of the two appraisals serves as a backup offer for instances when the employee does not sell their home in a timely manner. If the home does not sell after being on the market 60 days, the employee may accept the AVO. In these instances, a contractor buys the property from the employee for the average appraised value. Each VA administration defines which employees are authorized to participate in the AVO. The then Undersecretary for Benefits told us that all VBA SES employees were offered AVO benefits when making a PCS move. If an employee accepts the AVO, VA pays a contractor a home sale acquisition fee. In FY 2014, this fee was 27.5% of the AVO. One last piece of background information pertains to VA's SES pay structure. In 2004, VA established a pay band structure for SES pay. In 2014, VA's SES salaries ranged from approximately $120,000 to $181,000. VA categorized their SES positions into 3 different pay bands based on the scope of responsibility for each position, with pay band 1 representing the highest level of complexity and pay band 3 representing the lowest. The position of Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations is a VA central office-based SES pay band 1 position located in Washington, D.C. The position is responsible for the oversight of 4 area offices and 56 VEROs within VBA. The director of the Philadelphia and Wilmington VEROs is an SES pay band 3 position and involves significantly less responsibilities than the Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations. VA paid a total of about $274,000 related to the move of the Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations to move from the Washington, D.C. area to the Philadelphia area. The payments included about $33,000 paid to Ms. Rubens, who held that position, primarily to reimburse her for lodging, meals, tips, and dry cleaning expenses. Payments to other entities totaled approximately $241,000 and included about $212,000 to the home sale contractor, $16,000 to the company that moved and stored Ms. Rubens' goods, and about $13,000 in service fees that went to VA's Financial Service Center and the VA Technology Acquisition Center. Ms. Rubens did retain her pay despite the decrease in job responsibilities. But according to the federal regulations, the SES rate of basic pay for a career senior executive may only be reduced if the senior executive has less than a fully successful annual summary rating or has failed to meet the performance requirements of a critical element. From FY 2009 to the time of her reassignment, the Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations was rated better than fully successful on all performance appraisals. Therefore, we concluded that all critical elements were met. Based on applicable federal regulations, we determined VA could not reduce the annual salary upon reassignment despite the decrease in the scope of responsibilities. We also conducted a limited assessment of VBA's use of the PCS relocation program, and we determined VBA's reassignments of 7 general schedule GS-15 employees who were promoted to SES and another 15 SES employees who were moved to different SES positions. We determined that VBA management used reassignments through the PCS program as a way to increase SES pay. It is important to note from FY 2010 to 2013, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management guidelines precluded all SES employees from receiving annual pay increases. Further, in 2012, the then VA Secretary determined no VBA executive would receive performance awards based on concerns over excessive backlog of veterans' disability claims. 21 of 23 reassignments included salary increases. These VBA reassignments resulted in annual salary increases totaling about $321,000, which averaged about $15,300 per individual. We identified concerns with the salary increases because they did not seem to consistently reflect changes in the position's scope of responsibility. We also found VBA paid 7 employees relocation incentives when they moved to new positions. The 7 relocation incentives totaled $140,000. We determined that VBA did not properly justify these incentives. 5 relocation expenses were not justified because job vacancies were not announced or the positions were filled before candidates who applied were considered. The 2 other incentives were not timely justified as justifications were signed months after the job announcements were posted. The then Undersecretary for Benefits and the then VA Chief of Staff approved the VBA's relocation incentive justification and payments. VBA paid relocation expenses for 20 of the 23 reassignments, which included AVO-related expenses for 11 of the moves. Specifically, VBA spent about $1.3 million on relocation expenses for these moves. While these reassignments resulted in significant costs to VA, these expenses were allowable under the federal relocation program. VBA also spent a total of $1.8 million for the 23 reassignments we reviewed. While we did not question the need to reassign some staff to manage a national network of VEROs, we concluded VBA inappropriately used VA's PCS relocation program for the benefit of its SES workforce. In conclusion, our findings demonstrate the need to strengthen controls and oversight in order to improve financial stewardship in the program. And we are pleased to see the department is reviewing the evidence and taking this report seriously, but at this point, I do not have specifics as to how they are going to implement the 12 recommendations. They did give me implementation dates that spanned October 31 through December 31, and I expect more detail at that time. This concludes my statement, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much. All of my questions this morning for the IG are based on the evidence used to complete their report. Ms. Halliday, at the hearing on April 22nd, Mr. Pummill testified that the AVO program was necessary to fill the Philadelphia RO position because it was, quote, tough to fill. In your opinion, was the AVO used in Ms. Rubens' case because it was tough to fill?
No. I believe that the Philadelphia VERO offered significant management challenges to whoever took over the leadership, but you have to advertise positions, and there were candidates. I think our report says there was approximately 120, but don't quote me on the number.
At the April, you find it?
No, I have the Philadelphia one.
That's all right. At the April 22nd hearing, Ms. Rubens testified that the AVO program was, quote, part of a benefit program that VA offers to ensure transition and as quick and as smooth as possible to an office that needed leadership changes, end quote. Based on your investigation, is this the reasoning that VA used the AVO program in Ms. Rubens' case, and if not, what was their reasoning?
I believe the reason went to Ms. Rubens saying that she would not execute the move without the AVO. Originally, she agreed, she volunteered for the position and agreed to take it, and then a few days later, she said she would not take the position without the AVO benefit. And that was pushed through and approved by the, I believe, the VA Chief of Staff. That
Should that document have been signed prior to accepting the position?
You would hope so.
In your opinion, did Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves use their positions of authority to move Mr. Waller and Mr. McKenrick for their own personal and financial gains?
We concluded that in our report.
Were Mr. Waller and Mr. McKenrick essentially forced to move to Baltimore and to Los Angeles, respectively?
There are different facts that go into each move. We interviewed those individuals. We believe we got sufficient information and feedback from them that they felt that they were pushed to take those moves.
Did Ms. Rubens indicate to the IG that Mr. McKenrick reached out to her to volunteer his name for the Los Angeles position?
I believe Ms. Rubens said that her and Mr. McKenrick spoke, and he mentioned he had interest in the LA position. But this was right on the heels of being part of the review panel tasked to fill the vacancy. And when we spoke with Mr. McKenrick, he flat out said he did not want to go to Los Angeles. He was given only a week to affect the move, and that it put him further away from his children.
What were your conclusions about the role that the current Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations, Ms. McCoy, played in moving Mr. Waller out of St. Paul so that Ms. Graves could take that position?
I think the actions were inappropriate.
According to the report, you have made a criminal referral of evidence from this investigation to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia for possible criminal charges. Can you tell us what led you to take this action and what update you may have received from the District Attorney's Office if they will pursue the case?
What led us to making this referral was because it was a misuse of position that cost the federal government almost $500,000 when you look at the two, both Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves' actions. That seemed to be sufficiently high enough and to look like there was manipulation in the email information that we received that they pushed the two individuals out. I have no information as this point from the referral for Department of Justice other than they are evaluating the evidence.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you. The report tells us that the VA could pay as much as $280,000 in relocation expenses to move Ms. Rubin from VA central office in Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia. Once all PCS claims are processed, why did it cost so much to move Ms. Rubin from Philadelphia since it's so close? Can you give us a breakdown of the cost, specifically who received what? And did you find anything improper about the amount of reimbursements? Basically, did Ms. Rubin make any money on the move?
Okay. For the amount of money that we identified, the $274,000, Ms. Rubens only received approximately $33,261, and she's paid for temporary lodging, her real estate expenses, travel costs en route, and miscellaneous expenses associated with the move. Our general consensus is that the majority of those expenses were allowable under the federal travel regulations, and there really was not a problem with the reimbursement. We did find two expenses, one for alcohol and one for lacking receipts. I considered them somewhat de minimis, but they are unallowable, and you know you have to justify that. Federal travel regulations are what they are. The next big amount that everyone should be aware of is there was an amount paid to Brookfield, and it's for the 2014 home sale fee, and that's the 27.5% of the average appraised value of the $770,000 for her house. That does not go to Ms. Rubens. That goes to a contractor that is under a GSA contract, not a VA contract.
On that point, on that very point, that's my concern. Because general service, as I mentioned before, and I mentioned it to you when you were here before, this is a government-wide program. All of the agencies operate under this program. Now, as of October 1, 2015, the VA will no longer offer this program to the VA employees. This raises the larger issue as to whether this program is being administered properly across the government, not just VA. I am concerned that the program elsewhere, if it's not working for the VA, or are they administering it, is something wrong, or is it a problem across the board? You indicated you only could speak to VA. I am writing a letter to the GAO and asking them to give us an update as to how this program is working government-wide. because I think it's unfair if all of the other agencies are administering this program and it's working, and the VA employees are going to be left out. And we're talking about top level, but this program is available for all VA programs that are moving, and this is allowed for them. How is this going to affect the VA employees?
First, I think your actions to ask GAO are very appropriate. I think you should look at this. There's a substantial amount of money in the AVO, the percentages paid for these home acquisitions. And depending upon the competitive market, market that has rising prices versus dropping, sometimes it's a benefit, sometimes it's not. As far as VA deciding not to participate in the AVO program, I believe that's their choice. They have a couple choices: not to participate or to put appropriate levels of controls in place so the type of activities that we described in our report don't continue to happen. My understanding is that they are looking at other recruiting tools that might be more appropriate, but I do not have information on that at this time. As I said earlier, I'm expecting more detail from VA. I don't necessarily think that the AVO program is the only program that could be effective here, but in this time, I think that it's important to have some recruiting tools to get the best of the best to the positions they need to be in.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Lamborn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your leadership and the ranking members' leadership and questions. We really need to get to the bottom of this, and I think there have been some excellent questions, so I'll just build on what's already been asked. And thank you for the work that you did. To follow on what Ranking Member Brown just asked you, it looks to me like there's some abuse going on. Was this unique to the VA or a subset within VA, or is this potential out there for the entire government, and maybe there's abuse in other departments?
I would think the potential exists, and that each department, it would be dependent upon whether they had adequate controls in place to process all of the requests and authorizations made under the program. As far as what percentage they may pay for a company to pick up the home sale, this is in the contract. GSA puts the terms of those contracts, and all federal agencies rely on it.
So at a minimum, you would urge us to look at requiring the VA to rewrite its regulations in this area, and at a maximum, take this to the rest of the government, maybe go to the OGR committee, for instance.
I would think it should be looked at government-wide. I would also say that I believe VA is rewriting it.
Okay. Now, that's the AVO program. Also, I think it doesn't make sense that if someone volunteers for a lower position, that is a lower responsibility position, they keep the same high salary. Now, this isn't maybe going to happen every day, but what would keep someone from sort of checking out and really kind of abdicating their responsibilities, taking a really low responsibility job? I mean, in this case, it was $15,000. Normally would be the lesser salary, but way, way less. I mean, what kind of potential is there for abuse here?
I think there's a lot of potential, but it wouldn't be abuse at this point, since that is allowable under OPM regulations. I definitely think it should be looked at. When you look at the private sector, your pay is commensurate with your responsibilities. I see no reason why it would change.
And once again, is this unique to the VA, or is it government-wide?
Government-wide, sir.
Okay. And do you have any evidence that other departments have seen this happen, maybe that never hit the news?
I have no evidence to that. My scope of responsibility stays within the VA.
Okay. And then a real specific question on the facts right in front of us that led to this whole hearing today. Let's see, where did I have it? Okay. In your report, you found that in March 2014, Ms. Rubens requested a market analysis of her D.C. area home from the VA's AVO contractor, Brookfield. Did the evidence gathered give you any indication as to why she requested this analysis when she did?
I'd have to take that for the record. I'm not sure.
Okay, if you could, please. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Tucano. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on Mr. Lamborn's questioning, your report states that according to Mr. Pummill, quote, the VA chief of staff at the time said that an SES employee's salary could be increased as long as the executive was moving to a different location, end quote, despite OPM guidelines preventing SES employees from annual pay increases and establishing a salary cap. Was the VA chief of staff correct? I understand that for many of the transfers you examined, employee responsibility decreased, which was not reflected in new salaries. And it's essentially a similar question that Mr. Lamborn asked. So was the chief of staff's statement correct?
Partially.
Okay.
I think there was too broad of an interpretation applied here. I think if they ask the chief of staff again, can the salary increase if the responsibilities of the position drop substantially, the answer would be different.
Okay. I'd like to know if, under current OPM policy, SES employees are allowed a pay increase when being transferred.
Yes, if they go to a different position.
They go to a different position, and it's more responsibilities.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how can the VA ensure that when employees transfer into a position with less responsibility, their new salary reflects that decreased responsibility? Is it through the rewrite of regulations, or?
I believe that has to be addressed with the Office of Personnel Management, who set up the guiding rules for pay setting for SES.
So that must be systemic. It has to be beyond just the department of the VA. It has to be a systemic policy determined by OPM, by the Office of Personnel Management. Well,
VA may have more executives that transfer because it's in such a large decentralized environment, and there's many openings across the nation where maybe some other federal agencies are more headquarters based. So we have a lot of that in VA.
the PCS and AVO programs were created for a reason, to help ensure that the federal government is able to get the right people into the right jobs and to fill vacancies, particular in high-level positions. I know that the VHA, in particular, has had a tough time filling vacancies. Do you know if VBA faces a similar problem as the VHA?
From my understanding, but I do not have empirical evidence, VBA does face the same problem in filling the vacancies across its 56 VAROs.
You already answered that there was not, in particular, in this particular example, in Philadelphia, that there was not a shortage of candidates. You had 120 candidates. But I want to ask a more general question. Might that be an exception? Is there a shortage of suitable candidates for high-level positions at VBA? Or you're not able to really answer that question?
I wouldn't have the evidence on that. I looked at the two positions, what was advertised for Los Angeles, what was advertised for Baltimore here.
Okay. My last question was, does the VBA have trouble recruiting talent? And that's probably something.
That's something for the department to answer.
Okay, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. A quick question. Was the Philadelphia RO position ever advertised?
Yes, it was. Right? No, I'm sorry, it was not. It was not. I'm getting Baltimore and LA confused.
I appreciate it.
The Philadelphia was not.
So the position where Ms. Rubens went was not advertised. Thank you. Dr. Rowe.
Thank the chairman. I'm going to bring us down to Ms. Halliday. Thank you again for being here and providing this information for us. One of the things I think you see across the country is a loss in faith of government, and I think this is a poster child for it. You have a situation where we have our Social Security recipients are getting no increase this year at all. I'm going to tell you about a couple of guys I know back home. One is Bud Pate. He's a retired Baptist preacher, a Marine, lost his arm in Vietnam. Randy Kingston, both these guys are friends of mine. Randy is a paraplegic, a young man, had not married, became paraplegic after in Vietnam during an explosion, a battle. And this young woman married him, who knew him ahead of time, knew him when he was whole, but married him, has been faithful together all these years. And these veterans that we see out there are having to struggle to get their benefits of a few $100s or a few $1,000s a month. And then I see things where we're paying somebody $33,000 to drive up the road 140 miles and live in a hotel for a few days till they can get a house. If you pay 55 cents a mile, that's a $77 trip, not a $33,000 trip. And if you eat at the Four Seasons every night, I don't see how you could spend $33,000. And that's not what average people do out there. When average people like me that go out and work for themselves for 30-something years, and I do less, next year I get paid less. That's what happens in the real world. And that's not what's happening here. And I go home and see these injured and disabled veterans. And then I come up here and hear where these senior officials, it seems like they've manipulated a system that they know how it works to, the VA has shifted people around when we said, no, you can't raise people's salaries during this particular time so we can sort all this out. But they figured out how to do it. And that sort of cynicism is really pervasive, I think, when you go home and trying to explain and listen to your testimony, which has been extremely compelling to me. I just want to get that on the record, and I think we have a lost trust. And so I understand this program. Two people come in and appraise your house. I looked up why we're doing this on the web. The average time is about 60 days on the market around here for a home. If I sell my home here, and a private citizen does, they just got to wait till they sell their home. If it's 60 days, if it's 160 days, they've got to wait just like you probably do if you sell your house here. So the way I understand it is this program they've got is you go out and get your house evaluated at $800,000 or whatever it is. You pay this contractor 27.5%. That's $200-something thousand that they got. They can discount that house $100,000 and sell it quickly and make $125,000 without blinking an eye. Am I correct on that? Isn't that how they do it?
That could happen, yes.
We need to look at that because
That's a GSA contract.
Yes, I think the one expense in this that I saw that looked pretty reasonable was a poor guy that sent his people down and moved all the furniture. I think that's a fairly reasonable $16,000 to pack up a big home like that and move it. I think was reasonable. These other things look to me, many of them, look to be over the top. And I simply say that because of the people that I go back home and see every single week when I go home, and veterans that can't get in to the Phoenix VA right now or get the care they need, and they see this. I think this is very telling to me. Anything else in the report that we haven't talked about? I think we've pretty well seen what it is it looks like that this position was a position that Ms. Rubens wanted to go to and essentially worked the way around in the system, knew how the system worked, and was able to obtain that system. Am I correct in that?
That's our general conclusion.
As a conclusion. That's what I thought. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Halliday, for your report this morning. According to Table 7 on page 30 of your report, the incoming Los Angeles Regional Office Director received a relocation incentive of $20,000. As I understand it, relocation incentives are only supposed to be paid in cases where qualified applicants cannot be found or the position is hard to fill. However, in your report states that 168 applicants, 5 of whom were considered best qualified, had applied for the Los Angeles position. So according to the VBA policy, should a relocation incentive have been offered in this case?
Since there wasn't a final conclusion to whether those 5 individuals that were considered best qualified could actually fit there, I'd have to say, agree with you that relocation should not have been paid.
Thank you. And then one other question is, when an SCS employee is offered a reassignment, what are their rights to refuse that reassignment, and what is the process to discuss the reassignment with the VBA leadership?
Okay. Generally, the position should be advertised. The individual should apply and be considered in the pool of competitive candidates. There are occasions when there's a discussion that someone would like to go to another spot and knows that it's open. I think at that point, you can have a discussion, you can identify your interest, but if you have a specific interest, we in the IG, if someone raises that, we don't pay moving expenses. We don't pay the expenses associated to, for the travel there. We say, okay, you can go to that position, but that's at your choice. That's not at the government need. I think once the government need comes in, and in this case, what happens, and I'm not sure if I'm going to give you all the detail on this, and I'll add anything for the written record, but it's called a management-directed move. I do not want to go to the position, but then you have to go. When you do a management-directed move, the government then agrees to pay the expenses.
So there are no, so there are, in some sense, if that strategy or protocol is implemented, then there are no rights of the employee to refuse a reassignment?
In a management-directed move, once they pay, the person really feels that they're at risk of losing their job if they do not accept it. That's almost the last thing you can do.
Thank you. I yield back.
Is it safe to assume that one of the easiest ways to be fired at the VA is to refuse to move with a management-directed move? You don't have to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Benishek, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Halliday, for being here today. Can you elaborate? Is there any role that Ms. Hickey had in any of this that you're aware of? Was there communications between her and Ms. Rubens?
I believe there was communications between Ms. Rubens and Ms. Hickey when Ms. Rubens said, I'm interested in the position, and General Hickey had said that she'll do anything she can to help that make that happen. I think it's noted in the report there. The other role that we played is as the approvals for the transfer and position go up, has to sign that then moves on to the VA Chief of Staff. So there is a documentation trail on the approval and the approval of the AVOs, things like that.
I think you recommended that the Secretary tried to recoup the $300,000 that was given to Ms. Rubin. Could you elaborate on that recommendation a bit more?
That's recommendation number 9. And what we did was it was the OIG's position because there was, we believe there was manipulation to get that vacancy open so that individual could take that spot, that the government had lost $274,000 because it paid that amount. General counsel will have to go in and weigh the logistics, the VA general counsel. as to how much of that is recoverable. That decision, I don't know what's going to happen yet.
Recoverable, what does that mean? I mean,
That someone would have to pay that back.
right, but I mean, if that is truly the case, that this position was not a management mandated, shouldn't all of it be recoverable?
That's why we put the 274,000 in there. But it's clearly going to be out of our hands at
Right,
this
right. No,
point.
I understand. I understand. Can you tell me a little bit more about, as I understand that the VA has their own home loan program that sells thousands of homes a year for less than this 27.5% service fee. Are you familiar with any of that? Or-
You talking the ones that for veterans?
Yeah. Is that-
That's clearly
something-
different
that's
than this
different.
is.
Okay.
This is what the federal government has put in place to move senior executives around to fill key vacancies.
All right.
So I wouldn't mix the two. One is an entitlement program, and this is
But this
administrative.
this Brookfield, that's a contract with the General Services Administration. That's a general government-wide type.
Yes, my understanding, it's on the federal supply schedule. It's a contract that is awarded by GSA and then used by the federal agencies that participate in the program.
Do you know, happen to know how many transactions occur either within the VA or the government as a whole that use this service a year?
I do not have that information. That would probably be vested in GSA.
All right. I think that's
Thank you.
all I have for you now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Halliday, thank you. My understanding about the report is that it's limited to SES employees, but it includes a few GS employees 15 who were moving up. And this is damning enough, but I'm concerned that this practice of moving people into jobs with less responsibility but the same amount of money is occurring at other levels as well. And I'll just give you an example. Ed Russell, who was previously the director of the Reno Regional Office for BVA, which was one of the worst in the country, was put on paid leave. He stayed on that administrative leave for almost a year. Then they couldn't or wouldn't get rid of him, so a brand new position was created in Washington. They called him a senior advisor in the Office of Field Operations, but he teleworked from Reno. He didn't even move back to Washington. Now, I can't find out for sure what his salary was, but I doubt if it went down. Now, the responsibility that he had as senior advisor while teleworking from Reno had to have been less than being the director of the regional office. So I'm concerned that as VA pushes this initiative called My VA, if it's full of just patronage and cronyism, that is totally contrary to the image that it's trying to create and its efforts to restore faith in VA. Now, I wonder if you have any sense that this is more widespread than just the Reno office, or if you would be willing to look into it, if that would be appropriate or even possible.
I do not have any evidence as to whether it's widespread. The review focused on the VBA moves. With a congressional request, we would look into it.
And that would be something that you could do, though, right? If
We could.
requested it. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Ms. Walorski, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Halliday, for being here yet again. I guess I would call this report, this IG report, a crisis in confidence, again, with the VA and with some of these senior level executives. And I guess I echo back to what Representative Rowe said. The discrepancy that is happening in this country between these high-level VA executives and the veterans that are in the districts that we all sit here and represent today is, to me, it's reprehensible, and we're looking at yet another crisis in confidence. I've been here, I'm only in my 3rd year. I'm one of the youngest members on this panel. You've been here since I've been here. when you look at yet another one of these examples of egregious spending, benefits that people in the private sector don't even have, people in my district can't even relate to these issues of paying people to move at the exorbitant amount of money, do you look at this at any point as the Inspector General and say, there's an issue with confidence here with these senior executives? And I guess to my other colleague's point, whether this is nationwide or not, I would have to suspect, based on just the data that we've seen in the 3 years we've been here, this is just the same old status quo behavior. There hasn't been a whole lot of shakedown when it comes to what kind of federal benefits are given to these senior executives in the VA. Do you see a confidence issue here as you look at the tangible data that you have?
I think every time the IG identifies a situation where they question the costs, the necessity of those costs, or the validity of those costs, it erodes the trust of veterans.
I agree, and I can tell you that my office number still rings every single day in Indiana's 2nd District with veterans that need help. They need our help in mitigating a system and bringing down the mountains of bureaucracy just so they can access the basic services that they were promised by this government when they signed up to go fight for freedom. And I think that it's just another egregious example that I look at this as a huge crisis in confidence yet again. That we feel like we've taken a couple steps forward and we go backward when we look at egregious spending. And that's where the Americans do disconnect. That's where our veterans simply cannot trust this government. And I think that it's an atrocity that as we continue to dig deep further in the weeds on this issue, that we've got to hold additional people accountable and make sure that the actions of the senior executives of the VA are absolutely transparent to the American public. And so we have a long road ahead. And I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waltz, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commander Barnett, I'd like to thank you for being here and let you know your team here in Washington is doing a fabulous job, and we certainly appreciate it. And my 2016 dues are on the way, so that email you sent. So you do a good job of reminding me, so we'll get them. But Ms. Halliday, nice to see you again, as always, and I appreciate your time. And I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for, I think, once again, elevating this committee above the partisan politics, for bringing it to the point of trying to improve the care for veterans. I also think it's noted that together we're doing what we're supposed to do. Reports are being done. We're doing our oversight. Changes are being made. An undersecretary is no longer an undersecretary, and I certainly can't say if it was in direct result of this, but I think people can draw their conclusions. I also would say that that Deputy Secretary Gibson's willingness to come here at every case and his volunteering to come here, and I think the chairman was very clear and sufficiently stated why that was probably not the right case here, because he's got a job to do, and I'm grateful that I think my colleagues here have both did the accountability piece, the subpoenas were correct, we've created space, we let Deputy Secretary Gibson do his work, and we'll have some answers by November 2nd. So I kind of want to, this is taking care of it. There's some good questions being brought up. The ranking member brought up a great point about across the board on this issue, which I think is very important to look at. I want to ask more specifically about the role of the IG and this committee stepping up to do its oversight responsibility. I do think it should be noted we're approaching 700 days without someone in the top job at the VA Inspector General. That in itself is inexplicable to me. With that being said, the broader issue of the IG's role and this committee's role of getting aggressive to do what we're doing today, and I'm proud of that. I want to ask a couple specifics on this. How many investigations has your office conducted on personnel issues at VBA? Maybe that's an to get back to us, or
I'd have to get
yeah,
back to you on the record on that.
Would you know in a general trend, is it increased or decreased? Again, maybe.
I think my division for my administrative investigations is inundated with work.
Okay. Because I think this is an important one for us, and I would ask my colleagues on this. I've been an unabashed supporter of the VA and the role, and you and I talked about some of these where it goes back to the vision to do some of them because you have to triage those. You had, I think, some very strong vision, the next Inspector General that comes in, that you work with them. I kind of want to know, for you to help me understand this, how does it work when you complete a report? Because I think the public is starting to see, and one of the questions we're asking is, what do we do with this and how do we implement change? So what happens when you send a report over to the VA?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll send the report over to the VA. The recommendations in this particular report were directed to the Deputy Secretary because everyone else in the chain of command was involved at some level of the decision-making and the actions that occurred. The department gets a specific period of time to review the recommendations.
Who reviews that?
Well, that'd be the choice. I sent it to the Deputy Secretary. He could task whoever he wants to review the details of the report. You know, he might have general counsel involved.
Does the evidence file go with it?
We do send evidence over. We did. We sent the evidence over, and I know general counsel and the Office of Accountability Review were involved in looking at the evidence.
And you and I talked about then and on that is that how do you go about committing to implementing your recommendations? That's kind of our role. Is that correct? Is that where you see it? I see this is where the disconnect is. You do the investigation, you put it out, you send it over to people. People in charge look at it. They can either implement or not implement. This is where I think the disconnect is. This is where I think it's where we step in. And there's people who are proposing another board between us and them. That came up at a hearing we had here recently, kind of a new oversight board, especially dealing with health. Is it your interpretation of how this is supposed to work? This is where we're supposed to step in and make sure the implementation's happening?
I think that you are in the best position to make sure people are held accountable to implement those recommendations. Our internal operations has a follow-up review. We track the actions to determine how long a recommendation is going to stay open, and is the department taking responsible actions to actually correct the problem. But in cases where you want quick action, yeah, I think that's the role of the
I
Congressional
agree, and I think in this case, I think we've got the right people. I think Deputy Secretary Gibson, yourself, this committee see ourselves as partners on fixing this, but at the end of the day, I have been saying, and I think the committee has executed that, it's our responsibility by virtue of the public vote and confidence and statutorily in this office for us to do that. And so I would argue today is what you're seeing, especially on this specific case, the system is working as it's supposed to with vigorous push by us when we're ingrained. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waltz. Mr. Kaufman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly welcome the commander of the American Legion here today. Unlike Mr. Waltz, my dues are paid up. I want to go over these relocation expenses just for a minute here. That totaled $274,019.12 for a Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations to move from Washington, D.C. to the Philadelphia area. And here's my issue with that. When I look at the relocation expenses that we pay our military, that the Department of Veterans Affairs is there to support, to serve, that the highest one can receive, I think, is around $4,000. If we look at the pay scale for an 010, which is a 4-star flag officer, that individual would receive a dislocation allowance of $4,514.29, and that's with dependents, an 010 with dependents. That's 4-star. I retired from the major as I retired from the Marine Corps as a major, and so that would be the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Would receive that $4,514.29. They would receive mileage, and they would obviously have their household goods moved at 14,000 pounds, that the government would pay for that expense. I mean, that's incredible. How did this get so out of control, Ms. Halliday?
It's a pretty broad question.
Yeah.
Without being able to lay the services that are supported through a military move against the private sector and against the VA, I can't really answer that. Okay. I would think that the contracts are set up. We saw that the percentages paid were the percentages per the contracts. It's possible. I think you should pursue GSA.
Sure.
And is there another option available that still wouldn't inhibit senior executives moving from one position to another?
See, for our military personnel, there is no compensation in terms of if you lose money on the sale of your home, there is no compensation for that. Yet for VA executives, when the move is directed, there is compensation for that. And what we can see is that in compensation, this level of compensation is so high that it incentivizes this culture of corruption, where we have an example of a senior executive who is incented to move and forces somebody else out of their position just to move to get the compensation. And I just think that that is extraordinary. And I you know, what is so upsetting about this, I think, is the fact that you don't have leadership at the top of the Veterans Administration that seems to be concerned about reforming this process, that it's always the whistleblower that comes up with this, or you as the Inspector General's office, from the Inspector General's office, that comes up with these issues, and that the VA is so slow to respond. And we had testimony today of individuals that were involved in the appointment wait time scandal that are still with it, that were at the top of the scandal, that were complicit in the scandal by all observations, that are still on paid administrative leave, and this issue happened last year. I know that right now you're focused on this issue, but what is the VA's policy on SES personnel that seem to be placed indefinitely on paid administrative leave?
I can't answer that, I'm sorry.
I just think that's extraordinary. Well, I think I commend you on your work. I certainly hope, I think that clearly the fact that this was manipulated by virtue of forcing people out of their positions, not advertising the positions as open as they should have on a competitive basis, and then moving simply to get this extraordinary compensation that's so excessive. Clearly, I think there's criminal wrongdoing in this, and I hope it's pursued by the Justice Department. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costello. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I'd like to pick up on the comments that my colleagues, Mr. Kaufman and Ms. Titus, made relating to some of the gaming of compensation within the VA. It almost seems like friends are rewarding friends rather than focusing on reforming the VA. And so I would just reiterate that I think that we really need to get to the bottom of how pervasive that may be in the VA. But that's something, obviously, I'm sure all of us as members will discuss a little bit more. I also want to commend you for your continued work in providing accountability and shining a light on the abuses there. Typically, this committee will have witnesses before them that we can ask questions who either were culpable or who can actually speak to how they're either reforming the challenges or what mistakes were made along the way. But today we don't have that. We just have you. So I'm sure it's a little bit odd that you're here delivering bad news. We're as outraged as anyone, but we don't have anyone really to direct that outrage to. Let me start with a couple really fact-specific questions just for the record. First, with respect to Philadelphia and Ms. Rubens, as well as Mr. Graves and St. Paul, any evidence that family considerations were part of the reason why they wanted to relocate to those facilities?
You would have to ask them.
All right, I just know that in past, I believe there was some testimony by Ms. Rubens indicating that family was nearby, but there was nothing, you weren't able to unravel anything more to that?
No.
Okay. During your review of Ms. Rubens' move to Philadelphia, were you able to determine when she placed a deposit on the construction of her new home in Philadelphia? And the reason I'm asking that question is because I'd like to know whether that was before or after her reassignment took place.
I'll take that for the record. I'm not sure if I have it or not.
Okay. Next, and this is as much about me making sure that I describe this accurately when I leave this room as anything. You had testified essentially that the VBA basically had a process to circumvent the pay freeze and bonus freeze mechanisms that were in place. Is that correct?
The practice they were using did exactly that.
So it's fair to say that I believe the reason why we had pay freezes and no more bonuses was sort of the VA's attempt to say, we're going to take responsibility here. The wrongdoing that has been uncovered, we're going to get to the bottom to, and we're not going to, in the process, we're not going to receive bonuses or increase pay, and yet they basically just did it, right? They just did it anyway. Moving forward, you had said at this point in time you don't have recommendations on how to prevent that from happening moving forward. At some point in time, will you issue recommendations to that effect? Or is this really just people doing the wrong thing and you can put all the rules in place and if they're going to do what they're going to do and violate the rules, they're going to violate the rules?
Being in my occupation, you can always circumvent the controls if you want to. I hope to say this is the exception and not the rule, not across the board. But the two we looked at, we had problems.
Okay, in your position, looking at the rules with not looking at these specific facts, but just looking at those rules, do they make sense? Would you look at them and say this is sufficient? There are sufficient enforcement mechanisms here to make sure that people don't get pay increases, people don't get bonuses, or do they really have to go further? Because
I think if people act with integrity, generally the rules were strong enough, but you're always going to have some that don't.
That's a brilliant point, because I ask myself, how many more rules can we put in place? And if people are acting with integrity, we may not have to put that many more rules back in place, but if they're not acting with integrity, we're going to put all the rules in the world in there and it still won't matter. That's the frustrating thing. And I will just add, I'm not going to get into the IG report on what's happening in Philly, but it really bothers me to hear that we've apparently made some progress in implementing some of the reforms at the Philadelphia VARO, but the person who was there spearheading that has done what she's done. And so the veracity of which it just further calls into question the credibility of the reforms that have been made, and it really is I'm flabbergasted by this report, absolutely stunned, but I commend you for your ongoing work on behalf of the VA. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costello. I would draw members' attentions to page 18 of the report, where Ms. Rubens said that she grew up in Delaware and that the Philadelphia RO was close to home. She also testified in this committee that her mother was just a few miles down the road. And Ms. Graves, on page 22, it states that she stated that the move to St. Paul got her closer to her mother. So that answers those questions. Ms. Brown, do you have any closing comments?
No, sir. I think that we're going to move forward in looking at the entire program through general service and making sure that VA employees are not penalized, but if the program is not working overall, then we need to look at, because we have 13 agencies that use this program, and perhaps we are bringing something to the attention that everybody needs to double down on and take a look at. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing.
Thank you very much, and Ms. Halliday, thank you for appearing before this committee. There are no further questions, so you're excused, and I just want to summarize for the members this morning that the committee has voted to issue a subpoena to the 5 VA employees that we requested to appear before us today. They will now be required to testify at a hearing on November 2nd at 7:30 p.m. and be prepared to respond to questions. As a reminder, I will also be requesting the presence of former Undersecretary for Benefits, Allison Hickey, at the hearing to testify in her role as a private citizen. I would ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material. And without objection, so ordered. And now this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.